Something inside your system just crossed a line it cannot reverse. Not a feeling, not in a mood, not something you imagined into existence. A deeper layer of you has shifted its operating state, quietly, without permission, without warning. This is what happens when stored potential stops waiting and begins releasing itself as raw expansion. Like a collapse turning into light, like pressure rewriting its own limits. There is no return point in this pattern, because what you are sensing now is not changing arriving. It is energy revealing what it has already become. Your energy didn't rise, it ignited. And what follows is not an adjustment, it is acceleration beyond recognition. The energy recognition break. Mike, there is a moment that most people miss entirely. Not because they are not paying attention, but because they have been trained to look for it in the wrong place. They wait for recognition to come from outside. A nod, an acknowledgement, a moment when someone else sees what they carry and finally names it. And in that waiting, something extraordinary gets buried under ordinary expectation. The energy recognition break is not the moment someone else sees your power. It is the moment you stop needing them to. This is not confidence in the way the world teaches confidence. Confidence, as most understand it, is a performance built on past results. You did something well, so now you believe you can do it again. That is competence confidence. Useful, but fundamentally conditional. It relies on a track record. It requires evidence. And the moment the evidence disappears, so does the feeling. What happens in the energy recognition break is categorically different. It is the moment your system stops sourcing its sense of reality from external confirmation and begins drawing from something that exists prior to evidence, prior to the outcome, prior to approval. Think about what that actually means. Most of your life you have been operating on a loop. You act, you receive feedback, you adjust your internal state based on that feedback, and then you act again. This is the standard human operating cycle. It is reactive by design. It is calibrated to the environment rather than to the field beneath you. The energy recognition break interrupts that loop at its source. It happens when you are in a moment of pressure, not triumph, and something inside you does not collapse the way it used to. The world presents the same conditions that once would have sent you searching for reassurance, and instead of searching, you simply hold. Not because you are suppressing fear, not because you are being stoic, but because a layer of you that does not require validation has become load-bearing in your system. You recognized your own energy before the situation confirmed it. That is the break. That is the shift. And here is what makes it irreversible. Once your nervous system experiences sourcing from the internal field rather than the external loop, it does not fully return to the old dependency. The old loop still exists. The old habits of seeking confirmation still arise, but beneath them, there is now a knowing that did not exist before. A quiet, structural certainty that the energy is real regardless of whether anyone else measures it. Most people spend decades trying to build this through achievement. They accumulate accolades, titles, relationships, possessions, and still the recognition hunger persists because the source has not changed. You are feeding the hunger with external food, and external food never satisfies an internal appetite. The energy recognition break is the moment you stop eating from the wrong source. What triggers it is different for every person. For some, it is a quiet night when everything falls apart and they discover they are still standing. Not because circumstances changed, but because they stopped waiting for circumstances to authorize their standing. For others, it is a conversation where they speak their truth and feel, for the first time, that the speaking itself was enough, regardless of how it was received. For others still, it is this: a slow and creeping awareness that the version of themselves they have been performing for the world is increasingly thin, a projection, and that beneath it, something dense and enormous and real has been waiting without urgency, without frustration, simply waiting for the performance to exhaust itself. When the performance exhausts itself, the real thing steps forward. That is the break, and what you feel in the aftermath is not euphoria, it is not exciting, it is something quieter and more foundational than either of those states. It is the sensation of weight becoming support instead of burden, of presence becoming fuel instead of exposure. You are no longer waiting to be recognized. You have recognized yourself, and from this point forward, the energy you carry does not need permission to exist. It simply exists. It moves through your actions not as something you are trying to access, but as something that has already been released into the structure of how you operate. The world did not give you this. The world never could have. This was always yours. You simply needed to stop looking outward long enough to feel what was already generating beneath the surface. The recognition break is not a destination, it is a restructuring. And everything that follows, every lesson in this transmission, builds on the foundation that was just laid in the moment you stopped waiting for someone else to see what you already are. The internal frequency over frequency. Every system has a dominant frequency, a baseline hum, a default operating mode that shapes how information is received, processed, and transmitted. Most people inherit their dominant frequency from their environment, from the emotional climate of their early life, from the voices that surrounded them, from the repeated experiences that taught them what to expect from existence. This is not a flaw. It is how living systems calibrate. Efficiency requires defaults. Defaults require repetition, and repetition creates something that eventually feels like identity. But here is the problem. Most people mistake frequency for personality. They think the baseline hum is who they are, rather than what they absorb. And because they believe it is who they are, they defend it, protect it, organize their choices around maintaining it, even when that frequency is generating outcomes they do not want, even when it is creating resonance with experiences that diminish rather than expand them. The internal frequency override is the process by which your system stops running on the inherited default and begins generating its own carrier signal. This is not the same as thinking positive. Positive thinking is a surface-level intervention. It is changing the content of your thoughts while leaving the underlying frequency intact. You can repeat every affirmation ever written and still be running on a frequency of contraction. Because the frequency is not located in the content of thought, it is located deeper. It is the electromagnetic tone beneath thought, the vibrational signature that determines what your system attracts, repels, amplifies, or dissolves. When the internal frequency override engages, it does not replace your thoughts. It replaces the signal those thoughts are riding on. The override happens in layers. The first layer is somatic. You feel it in the body before you understand it in the mind. There is a shift in how physical space feels around you, a subtle but unmistakable change in density, as though something that was compressed has begun to expand outward, not just inward. Your breath changes, your posture changes, not because you corrected it consciously, but because the frequency shift restructures the physical container that carries it. The second layer is perceptual. You begin noticing that the same external information is landing differently. A problem that would have previously activated your threat response instead activates something that feels like curiosity or even calm readiness. This is not you choosing a better emotional reaction. This is your system operating at a frequency where that information no longer triggers the old alarm patterns, because the frequency itself has shifted the filter through which data enters. The third layer is magnetic, and this is where things become genuinely difficult to describe without sounding metaphorical, though what is happening is entirely structural. When you override the inherited default frequency and begin generating your own carrier signal, you literally change what you resonate with in your environment. Not symbolically, structurally. The people, opportunities, ideas, and patterns that match your new dominant frequency begin appearing with increasing regularity. Not because the universe is rewarding you, but because resonance is a physical law, like calls to like. Signals match signals. The field responds to the frequency it receives. Most people experience this as things suddenly working out. They attribute it to luck, or to the law of attraction as a mystical force, or to coincidence, but the mechanics are cleaner than any of those explanations. You changed the signal. The environment returned responses calibrated to the new signal. That is not magic. That is physics applied to human energy systems. Now, what actually triggers the override? It is not a decision. You cannot think your way into a frequency shift. The override is triggered by what might be called a state of sustained internal coherence. This is the state in which your thoughts, your emotions, your physical sensations, and your deeper orientation toward life are all generating the same signal, simultaneously, without contradiction. Most people spend their lives in internal contradiction. They want expansion but operate from the frequency of scarcity. They want connection but run the frequency of guarded isolation. They want to create but are tuned to the frequency of self-doubt. And because every frequency contradicts the other, no coherent signal is generated. The field receives static. Static generates nothing clean. When coherence is achieved, even briefly, even imperfectly, the system gets a taste of what it is like to generate a unified signal. And that taste is self-reinforcing. The nervous system begins to recognize coherent frequency as home. It begins to prefer it, to return to it, to build toward it even when circumstances seem to argue against it. The internal frequency override is not an event. It is the beginning of a new default, and here is what you need to understand about how this changes everything downstream. When your dominant frequency shifts, you do not have to work as hard to generate results. Not because the work becomes less, but because the energy behind the work is no longer fighting itself. You are no longer dividing your power between moving forward and resisting your own motion. The entire system aligns behind the direction. Effort stops being the price you pay for outcomes. It becomes the natural expression of a frequency that is already moving. That is the internal frequency override. That is what has already begun in you. And once a system begins generating its own carrier signal rather than running on an inherited default, the quality of everything that signal touches begins to change, permanently, progressively, without requiring constant management. You are no longer receiving the frequency. You are becoming it. The pressure to power conversion. Every human being alive has been told, in one form or another, that pressure is the enemy of peace. That stress is something to eliminate. That the experience of being crushed by circumstances is a problem to solve, a state to escape, a signal that something has gone wrong. What almost no one is told is this: pressure, in its raw form, is stored potential in a state of activation. The pressure to power conversion is not about reframing difficulty as a gift. It is not a motivational perspective. It is an understanding of energy mechanics, specifically how compression creates conditions for a release of force that could not have been generated without the compression itself. Consider what pressure actually is at its most elemental level. Pressure is the application of force to a system that has not yet found its release point. In physics, this is how energy becomes concentrated. A coiled spring holds more kinetic energy than a relaxed one. Compressed gas exerts more force when released than ambient air. A river dam generates more power at its release point than water flowing freely across a flat plain. The human energy system operates by the same principle, but with one critical difference. The human system has a consciousness layer that sits between the pressure and the release. And that consciousness layer, if it is running on fear-based interpretations of pressure, does not allow the conversion to happen cleanly. Instead of pressure becoming power, it becomes suffering, not because suffering is inevitable, but because the system is interpreting compression as evidence of danger rather than as pre-release concentration. It spends energy resisting the pressure rather than allowing it to build toward a conversion point. And in that resistance, the potential dissipates as stress rather than releasing as power. The pressure to power conversion happens when the consciousness layer changes its relationship to compression. This does not mean you stop feeling the pressure. You feel it fully. The weight is real. The compression is real. The difficulty is not minimized or spiritually bypassed. What changes is the way your system relates to what the pressure means, and therefore what it does with the energy being concentrated within it. When you shift from interpreting pressure as threat to experiencing it as pre-ignition, something remarkable happens in the body and mind simultaneously. The physiological stress response, which is fundamentally about threat neutralization, begins to modulate, not because the pressure decreased, but because the threat signal did. The same circumstances, the same weight, the same compression, but the system is now reading it as loading rather than attack. And when a system reads pressure as loading, it prepares for release rather than bracing for impact. This is the moment that separates people who are transformed by difficulty from people who are merely damaged by it. The pressure was the same. The external circumstances were comparable. What differed was whether the consciousness layer allowed the energy to concentrate and convert, or spent that energy fighting its own compression. Here is what the conversion actually produces. It generates a quality of clarity that is not available in uncompressed states. There is a reason breakthroughs most commonly follow periods of maximum difficulty. The clarity that emerges from genuine compression has a density and precision that ease-born thinking rarely achieves. When you are forced, by circumstances, to find the absolute most essential truth of a situation because there is no room for anything else, the result is an insight that operates at a different level of resolution than anything produced in comfort. This is not a case for seeking suffering. It is an understanding of why, when suffering arrives, the pressure to power conversion is the difference between collapse and ignition. Your system, right now, may be holding compressed energy that has not yet found its release point. The weight you have been carrying, emotional, circumstantial, relational, creative, may feel like evidence that something is wrong, but what if it is evidence that something is loading? What if the pressure you have been interpreting as obstruction is actually concentration? What if the compression that has been making you feel smaller is actually making you denser? And density in energy systems is the precondition for force. The pressure to power conversion asks you to sit inside that possibility, not as a comfort, but as a structural truth. To feel the weight and ask, not when will this end, but what is being concentrated here, and what will it become when it releases? Because it will be released. Pressure in a closed system always finds its conversion point. The only question is whether your consciousness layer is positioned to direct that release, or whether it dissipates through resistance before it can generate anything meaningful. When you position yourself correctly within compression, the release does not feel like relief. It feels like a launch, and everything you built during the pressure becomes fuel for what you are launching into. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was merely survived. Every ounce of compression becomes part of the propulsive force that carries you beyond the point where people who avoided pressure could never reach. That is the conversion. That is what pressure has always been trying to do to you. The disappearance of effort-based identity. There is a version of you that was built entirely around effort. This version worked hard to deserve things. It proved its worth through output. It measured its value by how much it produced, how consistently it performed, how visibly it struggled and succeeded. It wore effort as a badge, sometimes consciously, often unconsciously, and organized its sense of self around being someone who works for what they have. This identity was not entirely wrong. Effort is real. Discipline is real. The willingness to persist through discomfort produces genuine outcomes. None of that is false, but here is what effort-based identity costs you. It makes your sense of self contingent on continuous production. The moment you stop visibly striving, the identity wobbles. Rest feels like failure. Stillness feels like falling behind. The periods of your life that do not look like struggle feel illegitimate, as though you have not yet earned whatever you are experiencing. And beneath all of that is a belief so deeply embedded it rarely surfaces into conscious examination. The belief that you as a being require effort to justify your existence. The disappearance of effort-based identity is not the arrival of laziness. It is not the abandonment of discipline or the rejection of work. It is something far more fundamental and far more liberating. It is the collapse of the belief that your worth requires continuous justification through visible exertion. This disappearance does not happen through philosophy. You cannot argue yourself out of effort-based identity. You cannot decide by rational conclusion that you are worthy without proof, because the part of you that built the effort identity is not rational. It was built through emotional conditioning, through years of receiving approval for performance and withdrawal for rest. It is encoded at a level below reasoning. What dissolves it is a different kind of experience entirely. It dissolves when you have a moment of genuine power that arrived without effort, when something moved through you, or something shifted in your environment, or something opened in your understanding, not because you worked for it, but because your state, your frequency, your internal alignment created the conditions for it to emerge. Most people dismiss these moments. They call them luck. They call them flukes. They resist crediting themselves for what arrived without struggle, because their identity framework does not have a category for power that does not require suffering to activate. But the nervous system noticed. And over time, as these moments accumulate, the system begins to build a new reference point. A reference point that says, some of the most real and most powerful things that have moved through me did not arrive through force, they arrived through alignment. And once that reference point exists, the effort-based identity begins to lose its absolute authority. This is not a sudden collapse. It is a gradual and sometimes disorienting restructuring. You will find yourself in moments where the old identity reaches for effort, where it tries to manufacture struggle because struggle is what it knows how to use as currency, and you will simultaneously feel the pull of the new reference point, which says, what if you simply held the state? What if the power was already present and the effort was never the source, only the channel through which an already present force was moving? The disappearance is the moment you stop confusing the channel with the source. Effort is a channel. It is a conduit through which your energy moves into the world. But the energy itself, the actual power, does not originate in the effort. It originates in you. The effort gives it shape and direction, but shape and direction can also come from states that do not require strain. When this realization moves from intellectual to experiential, when you feel it in how you work, in how you rest, in how you create, in how you relate, the effort-based identity loses its grip, and what replaces it is not an identity at all. It is a presence that does not need to prove itself through output, a presence that generates from its own internal coherence rather than from its performance for an audience, even the audience inside your own mind. A presence that can be still without feeling absent, that can rest without feeling worthless, that can do less and produce more because the energy behind the doing has stopped fighting the very thing it is trying to create. The disappearance of effort-based identity is one of the most quietly radical transformations a person can undergo, because it restructures not just how you work, but how you experience your own existence between the moments of work. You stop being someone who does, you become someone who is. And from that being, the doing emerges, not as proof of worth, but as a natural expression of a state that is already complete. The collapse of emotional gravity. Emotional gravity is the invisible force that pulls you back toward familiar states. It operates the same way physical gravity does, silently, constantly, without requiring your agreement or awareness. You can rise, you can expand, you can reach states of clarity and power and genuine elevation, and then, without any external event triggering it, you feel the pull back downward, toward worry, toward contraction, toward the emotional baseline that has been your average state for most of your life. This is not a weakness. This is physics applied to inner experience. Every system has a gravitational center, an attractor state that exerts more pull than other states simply by virtue of familiarity and repetition. The longer you have occupied a particular emotional frequency, the stronger its gravitational field becomes. It is not a moral failure to be pulled back. It is the behavior of any energy system operating within a strong attractor field. But here is what most people never understand about emotional gravity. It is not fixed. the attractor state can change. The gravitational center of your emotional system can shift, and when it shifts, when the average state around which your system orbits changes, everything changes with it, because your emotional center of gravity determines not just how you feel in idle moments, but what kinds of thoughts arise naturally, what interpretations feel intuitive, what possibilities seem real versus fantastical, what risks feel reasonable versus reckless. Change the emotional center of gravity, and you change the operating reality of your entire existence. The collapse of emotional gravity is not the elimination of difficult emotions, it is the dissolution of the specific gravitational pull that has been keeping your system orbiting states that do not serve your expansion. This collapse happens in stages. The first stage is recognition without resistance. You begin to observe the pull without immediately surrendering to it. This is not suppression, it is not white-knuckling against a downward current. It is the development of enough inner spaciousness to notice, I am being pulled toward contraction, without that observation itself becoming the contraction. You create a hairline of distance between yourself and the gravitational force, not enough to escape it, just enough to see it operating. This hairline of distance is everything, because in that space, choice becomes possible in a way it was not before. Not easy, but possible. The second stage is what might be called frequency persistence. This is the practice, not a discipline requiring force, but a practice requiring attention, of returning to elevated states before the gravitational pull fully completes its descent, not waiting until you have hit emotional bottom and then trying to climb back, but catching the pull mid-arc and choosing, even briefly, even imperfectly, to reorient toward a higher frequency. The reason frequency persistence matters is neurological. Every time you return to an elevated state before completing the full descent into the attractor field, you are strengthening the neural pathways associated with that elevated state and weakening the gravitational hold of the default. You are, quite literally, rewiring the attractor. Gradually, over time, the elevated state begins to require less effort to access. The pull of the old attractor weakens. The new frequency begins to feel more familiar than the old one. And familiarity, remember, is how gravity is built. When the elevated state becomes the familiar state, it becomes the gravitational center. It becomes what the system orbits by default rather than by effort. The third stage is the collapse itself, which is less a sudden event and more the accumulated result of the first two stages reaching a tipping point. You notice one day that the pull feels different, less compelling, less inevitable. The old attractor is still there. It does not vanish, but its authority has diminished. The mass of the new center of gravity has grown large enough to compete with it, and then to exceed it. What follows the collapse is a quality of emotional life that feels genuinely different from anything the effort-based, gravity-dominated version of you experienced. Not the absence of difficult emotions, but the absence of their tyranny. They arise, they feel full, and then they pass. Not because you forced them to, but because the system is no longer organized around holding them. The collapse of emotional gravity creates what might be called emotional fluidity, the capacity to move through the full range of human feeling without getting trapped in any particular state. You feel grief without becoming grief. You feel fear without becoming fearful. You feel joy without becoming desperate to preserve it. Each state moves through a system that is no longer defined by its emotional content, but by the deeper current that runs beneath all of it. That deeper current is what becomes permanent. States come and go. The current remains, and when you are living from the current rather than the states, when you are identified with the deeper flow rather than the surface weather, the emotional gravity that once ruled your daily experience becomes something you observe rather than something you inhabit. You have not escaped emotion. You have become larger than any single emotional state's ability to contain you. The field begins self-correcting. There is a threshold in the development of any energy system at which the system begins to maintain itself. Below the threshold, maintenance requires constant conscious input. You have to manage the state. You have to monitor the frequency. You have to catch each deviation and consciously course correct. It is labor-intensive, not in a physical sense, but in the sense of requiring persistent inner attention. The system left to itself reverts toward the old pattern. Vigilance is the price of the new state. Above the threshold, something qualitatively different emerges. The system begins to self-correct, not automatically, in the sense of a machine running its programming, but organically in the way a healthy biological system maintains its own homeostasis. The body does not require you to consciously manage your temperature. When temperature deviates from optimal, the system detects the deviation and initiates correction without requiring your decision. The intelligence of the system itself handles the maintenance because the system has internalized the optimal state deeply enough to recognize and return to it without prompting. The field begins self-correcting is the moment your energy system crosses this threshold. What it means in practice is this: deviations from your expanded state no longer require heroic acts of willpower to address. You go off-center, and something in the field itself pulls you back, not because someone corrected you, not because you consciously noticed and forced a return, but because the field, now calibrated to a higher coherence, has built enough internal intelligence to recognize incoherence as deviation and initiate the correction process organically. You will notice this in small ways first. You will have a conversation that depletes you and find to your own surprise that recovery happens faster than it ever has before. Not because you worked hard at recovering, but because the system corrected without being managed. You will encounter a situation that would previously have destabilized you for days and discover that stabilization happens within hours or even within the duration of the experience itself. You will feel yourself beginning to contract and then feel something release from within that is not coming from your effort, something that simply opens and the contraction resolves. This is the field correction. It is one of the most unmistakable signs that a genuine shift has occurred. Not a temporary elevation, not a good period, but a structural change in the baseline from which your system operates. The mechanism behind this is layered. At one level, it is neurological. The neural networks associated with your expanded state have been reinforced to the point where they have become dominant pathways. The brain, when disrupted, defaults toward the most established route. When the most established route is the expanded state rather than the contracted one, disruption resolves in that direction. It is energetic. A field that has achieved coherence above a certain threshold has a self-organizing property. It generates internal corrective forces the way a gyroscope generates stabilizing forces. The more coherent the field, the stronger its capacity to return to coherence when disrupted. It is relational. As your field shifts, your environment shifts in response. Not magically, but through the mechanics of resonance and selection, the people, conversations, inputs, and experiences that reinforce your expanded state become more present in your life. The things that used to pull you downward become less frequent, less compelling, less able to get purchase on a system that no longer resonates with their frequency. The environment itself begins to participate in self-correction. This is not something you orchestrate. This is something you notice, recognize, and trust. The challenge at this stage is not maintaining the shift. The field is doing that. The challenge is learning to trust the self-correcting intelligence of the field rather than continuing to manage it with the same vigilance required at earlier stages. Many people, having worked so hard to reach this threshold, cannot stop working. They continue monitoring, managing, and efforting, not because it is needed, but because the habit of effortful maintenance has itself become an identity, and in doing so, they inadvertently interfere with the field's self-correcting capacity. They override the organic correction with their anxious management. They flood the signal with noise. The invitation here is radical for anyone who has built their inner life around control. Let the field do what it has learned to do. You built the coherence, you crossed the threshold. The field has internalized what it needs to maintain itself. Your role now is not manager, it is witness, occasional guide. The person who, when deviation occurs, trusts the return rather than forcing it. This trust is not passive. It is the most active form of participation available at this stage of development, because it requires you to resist the very habit that got you here, the habit of heroic, effortful intervention, and to operate instead from a foundation of genuine trust in what your system has become. The field is self-correcting. That means you are no longer the only thing holding this together. The system has learned to hold itself. The expansion without direction effort, every framework for growth that most people have ever encountered, is directional. Set a goal. Identify the gap between where you are and where you want to be. Build a plan to close that gap. Move along the plan. Evaluate your movement. Adjust course. Repeat until arrival. This framework is not wrong. It produces results. But it has an invisible limitation built into its fundamental architecture. It can only take you to destinations you have already been able to imagine, because you can only set a goal that exists within your current frame of reference. You can only plan toward a future that your present understanding can conceive. And the most extraordinary things that happen to any human life, the turns that are genuinely transformational rather than merely progressive, almost never arrive along the path that was planned. They arrive through expansion. Expansion without direction effort is not the abandonment of goals or plans, it is the discovery of a quality of growth that does not require a predetermined destination, because it is generated by the energy field itself rather than by the conscious choosing mind. Here is the distinction. Directional growth is movement along a line. You choose the end point, you trace the line, you walk it. Expansion is the growth of the space itself, not movement along the line, but the increase of the territory in which lines can be drawn. When your energy field expands, you do not arrive at a new destination. You become capable of conceiving destinations that were previously outside your ability to perceive. The ceiling does not rise, the ceiling disappears, and you discover there was always more space above it than your previous frame could contain. This is why people who experience genuine energetic expansion often struggle to describe what has changed. Nothing specific happened, no particular goal was achieved, and yet everything is different. Their perception of what is possible has changed. Their relationship to opportunity has changed. The quality of what they attract into their lives has changed. The ideas that arise in them have changed. Not because they are trying harder to think differently, but because the field in which thought arises has expanded. You cannot effort your way into this kind of expansion. And this is precisely where the without direction effort part of this lesson becomes essential. Directional effort is what you apply when you are moving toward a known point. You know where you are going, and you exert force in that direction. This is effective for closing gaps. It is ineffective for expanding space, because the expansion of space is not a gap-closing exercise. It is not a deficit being remedied. It is the natural behavior of a coherent field that has been given the conditions to grow. You do not direct the growth, you create the conditions. The conditions for field expansion are specific and counterintuitive to anyone trained in directional effort. They are open attention without agenda, sustained internal coherence, the willingness to let the field encounter things that are beyond its current edges without immediately trying to map them back into the familiar. That last element is the most critical and the most demanding. When you encounter something that is genuinely beyond your current frame, an idea, a possibility, a quality of experience, the habituated mind immediately tries to reduce it, to categorize it, to find the familiar pattern within it so that it can be managed. And in doing so, it prevents the field from actually being touched by what it just encountered. Field expansion requires the capacity to be encountered by the genuinely new without collapsing it into the already known. This requires a quality of tolerance for the unknown that is itself a product of energetic development. You cannot fake it. You cannot perform it. It is only available to a system that has developed enough internal stability that the unknown does not trigger the threat response, that the encounter with the edge of your frame is experienced as frontier rather than danger. And this is exactly the capacity that has been built through every lesson preceding this one. The energy recognition break gave you a source that does not depend on external confirmation, so the unknown does not require external validation to be engaged. The internal frequency override freed you from the inherited frequency, so encountering new frequencies does not feel like exile from home. The pressure to power conversion showed you that compression produces rather than destroys, so pressure at the edges of expansion is tolerable. The disappearance of effort identity, the collapse of emotional gravity, the self-correcting field, all of it has been building the internal stability that makes expansion without direction effort possible. You are now operating in a space large enough that you can afford to not know where you are going, because the expansion itself is the destination, and it will take you further than any specific goal you could have named. Because it is not limited to what you already knew how to imagine, the field is growing. Let it grow. Stop trying to steer what is already navigating itself toward more than you could have steered it toward. The expansion does not need your direction, it needs your permission. The permanent activation state, everything prior to this lesson, was preparation, not in the sense of being lesser. Each shift was complete and real in itself, but in the sense that each one was building toward something that can only emerge when all the preceding layers are in place. Like a circuit that requires every component to be correctly positioned before current can flow through the whole system. The energy recognition break was a component, the internal frequency override was a component, the pressure to power conversion, the disappearance of effort-based identity, the collapse of emotional gravity, the self-correcting field, the expansion without direction, each was a component. The permanent activation state is what happens when current flows through the complete circuit. This is not a peak state. It is not an elevated mood. It is not the feeling of being on that comes after a great sleep or a powerful experience or an exceptional conversation. All of those are temporary states, genuine, valuable, but time-limited. They rise and fall. They are experiences within the system rather than changes to the system. The permanent activation state is a change to the system. It is the condition in which the energy that has been building, unlocking, converting, and expanding throughout this entire transmission has found its settled form, the form in which it is no longer an extraordinary event but an ordinary state. Not ordinary in the sense of dull, ordinary in the sense of being the operating baseline, the default, the center of gravity around which everything else in your inner life now orbits. What does this actually feel like from the inside? It feels like it's available, like there is something present and ready within you that does not require activation, because it is already active, like a river that is always moving, whether or not you are consciously tending to it. You do not have to turn it on in the morning. You do not have to maintain it through discipline. It is simply there, generating, moving, available for whatever direction your attention and intention provide. It feels like the absence of a particular kind of friction, the friction that used to exist between who you were trying to be and who your energy was currently supporting. That friction has not disappeared because you resolved the gap by lowering your aspirations. It has disappeared because your energy state caught up to and exceeded the self you were trying to reach. You are no longer reaching toward your expanded self, you are living from it, and from within it, the former reach feels like looking back at a view from a lower elevation. It feels like clarity that does not depend on stillness. In earlier states, clarity was something you accessed by removing noise, through meditation, through rest, through deliberate withdrawal from stimulation, and that access is still available, still valuable. But the clarity of the permanent activation state is not silence-dependent. It persists through noise, through conflict, through complexity, through situations that formerly would have clouded everything. Not because you have become detached, but because the signal is strong enough that interference can no longer disrupt it the way it once did. It feels like trust in your own processing. Not arrogance, not the belief that you are always right or that your judgment is infallible, but a settled sense that what moves through you when you are in full activation has an intelligence that can be trusted. that the responses, insights, and impulses that arise from this state are coming from a more coherent level of your system than the fear-based, approval-seeking, reactively conditioned responses of the previous operating mode. The permanent activation state also changes the texture of time. Not metaphorically, the subjective experience of duration changes when your system is operating from full activation rather than from effort and struggle. Moments of genuine focus expand. Hours pass in what feels like productive presence rather than dragged-out endurance. Difficult conversations that would have stretched into exhausting ordeals complete themselves more quickly, with less residue, because you are processing from a more efficient level. Rest becomes genuinely restorative, rather than merely an interruption of productivity, and your relationship to what has not yet happened changes in a way that is perhaps the most profound of all the changes this state produces. The future, from within the permanent activation state, does not feel threatening in the way it once did. Not because you have certainty about it, you do not. Not because you have eliminated risk is still real. But because the self who is encountering whatever comes next is not the same self who was encountering it before. The former self encountered the future from a state of incomplete energy, a system that needed the future to deliver something in order to feel whole. The activated self encounters the future from a state of already sufficient energy, a system that does not require any particular outcome to maintain its coherence. This is the deepest change that the permanent activation state produces. You stop needing the future to complete you. And paradoxically, as every energy teacher in every tradition in human history has pointed out from different angles, when you stop needing the future to complete you, the future becomes dramatically more generous, not as a reward, as resonance. A system that is already complete generates a frequency that matches more of what is genuinely desired. A system that is operating from incompletion generates a frequency of desperation that repels the very things it seeks. The permanent activation state is not the end of desire. It is the transformation of desire from a force rooted in lack into a force rooted in creative overflow. You do not want things because you are empty. You want things because you are full, and fullness seeks expression. Creation happens differently. Relationships happen differently. Work happens differently. Even solitude happens differently. It is no longer the experience of being alone, but of being with the full presence of what you are, which turns out to be more than enough. This is the permanent activation. Not a ceiling reached, not a final destination where development stops and you rest on what was built. An activated state that continues to expand, continues to develop, continues to encounter new edges, but does so from a foundation that does not wobble, a circuit that does not go dark. Your energy is not occasionally available now. It is permanently online. Now you understand what this really was. Not a rise in emotion, not a temporary clarity, not something that came to visit and will leave again. This was a structural shift in how your system relates to itself. What felt like intensity was actually alignment catching up to a deeper state that was already formed beneath awareness. And once that alignment begins, it does not fully undo itself, because you are no longer processing life in the same way you used to. The signals are different, the weight is different. Even silence is no longer empty, it is active. This is why certain parts of your old perception feel distant now, not lost, just no longer compatible. You didn't gain power, you stopped filtering it out. And what remains is not transformation trying to happen, it is energy finally being allowed to exist as it is,